13,000 unburied corpses. That was the statistic waiting for the British Army. April 15th, 1945. The 63rd Anti-Tank Regiment rolled through the gates of Bergen-Belsen. The smell hit the soldiers a mile away. It was the scent of rotting flesh mixed with burning rags. The camp had ceased to be a prison. It had become an open-air graveyard. In the frame, 60,000 prisoners wander through the mud. They are not people anymore. They are living skeletons. Typhus rages in every barrack. Dysentery stains the wooden floors. Men drop to the ground and never rise again. The camera records. British soldiers cover their faces with handkerchiefs, gagging from the stench. But amidst this absolute decay, the soldiers saw something impossible. Life, health, discipline. Why were the guards so calm? The British expected panic or flight, but the SS remained at their posts. Standing among the piles of human remains were women in pristine uniforms. Irma Grese, Elisabeth Volkenrath, Juana Bormann. They did not run, they did not hide. They stood with their boots polished and hair perfectly styled. At first glance, ordinary auxiliaries. But in reality, the architects of this nightmare. It shocked the liberators more than the bodies. These women walked past the dead without a flinch. They stepped over corpses as if they were stepping over stones. There was no regret in their eyes, no shame, only a cold, professional indifference, and the horror was just beginning. The British commander ordered immediate action. He didn't just arrest them, he forced the SS women to work. They were made to drag the rotting bodies into mass graves with their bare hands. The footage shows. Grese smiles nervously at the camera. She adjusts her collar. She does not understand that her life is over. The upcoming trial would not just be a legal procedure. It would shatter the world's perception of gender and violence. The architecture of Bergen-Belsen was built on suffering, and the bill for that suffering was about to come due. Justice was coming. 60,000 people squeezed into a space designed for 10,000. Bergen-Belsen was a distinctive anomaly in the Nazi system. It opened in 1940. Originally, it held prisoners of war. But in 1943, the SS took partial control. They changed the architecture. They built fences within fences. The layout was strict. A sector for soldiers, a camp for residents, a prison for the condemned. The administration used this grid to separate victims. Nationalities were split. Political enemies were isolated. Unlike Auschwitz, the air here was not filled with chemical agents. Belsen had no gas chambers. At first glance, a mere detention center, but in reality, a site of passive death. The method was systematic negligence. The administration simply stopped caring if prisoners survived the night. Then came 1944. Joseph Kramer took command. History remembers him as the Beast of Belsen. He did not bring new weapons, he brought chaos. Why did the death toll spike? The population did not just grow, it exploded. In less than a year, the number of inmates multiplied by 10. Conditions collapsed, sanitation vanished, the barracks became breeding grounds for infection, typhus, tuberculosis, dysentery, inundation. These diseases replaced the firing squads. The planned abandonment reached its peak just months before the end, but it got worse. Food rations were cut to near zero. The administration stopped feeding the dying. The footage shows bodies stacked in piles against the fences. Living skeletons crawl over the dead. Survivors described a gray zone. They lay on wooden bunks. Next to them were corpses. The dead remained there for days. The living were too weak to drag them out. Life and death occupied the same mattress. April 1945. The Third Reich was crumbling. British and Canadian tanks were miles away. Heinrich Himmler looked at the map. He made a cold, pragmatic choice. He would not fight for this patch of hell. He handed over the camp without a shot fired. It was not an act of mercy. It was a strategic retreat to save ammunition. Defeat was imminent. April 11th, a neutral zone was declared. The artillery stopped. Allied troops entered the perimeter. The sound of heavy engines filled the air. The smell of decay hit the soldiers before they saw the prisoners. But the shock came from the guards. They were still at their posts. In the frame, SS officers standing calmly. Joseph Kramer walked out to meet the liberators. He wore his uniform. He did not run. He told the British commander he stayed to maintain order. The audacity was absolute. 13,000 unburied bodies. That was the landscape Josef Kramer presided over. He stood his ground when the tanks arrived. He told the British commanders he had remained behind to maintain order. But the soldiers looked past him and saw the truth. At first glance, a camp, but in reality, a graveyard of the living. The British entered the gates and the reality hit them. The smell was physical. 60,000 prisoners remained alive, but only technically. They were in critical condition, dying of starvation, dysentery, and typhus. They had been abandoned for days. No food, no water. The mortality rate was catastrophic. 500 people died every single day. A BBC correspondent, Richard Dimbleby, walked through the perimeter. He turned on his microphone and broadcast the horror to the world. The audio recording captures his shock. He describes an acre of land where the dead and the dying lie together. It is impossible to distinguish them. The living rest their heads against the corpses of their friends. Around them, emaciated figures move in a slow, aimless procession. They have no goal. They have no hope. They do not look at the camera. They stare at nothing. But the camera zooms in on something worse. Babies. Withered small creatures born inside the wire. They never had a chance. A specific incident marks the tape. A mother, driven insane by grief, screams at a British sentry. She begs for milk. She thrusts a small bundle into the soldier's arms and runs away, weeping into the darkness. The soldier stands there. He opens the blanket. He discovers the truth. The baby has been dead for days. The correspondent's voice breaks. He admits, "This day in Belsen was the most horrible of my life." The British response was immediate. It had to be. Medical teams rushed in to hydrate the survivors, but the soldiers had a different job for the captors. They forced the SS guards to work. The camera records the former masters dragging bodies, pushing them into mass graves. But this was only the beginning of the chaos. Liberation did not bring instant peace. Spontaneous justice erupted. Prisoners recognized their torturers. They attacked with fists, stones, and sheer numbers. The violence spilled over. Some SS guards, still armed, shot starving prisoners who tried to break into the food stores. The war was technically over, but the killing continued. Then came the typhus. The epidemic threatened to spread beyond the wire. The British command took drastic measures. They evacuated the survivors to disinfected facilities nearby. Then, the order was given. Flamethrowers were brought to the line. The footage shows the wooden barracks catching fire. The flames consumed the lice, the filth, and the infectious waste. The camp was erased from the earth to stop the disease. But as the smoke cleared, an uncomfortable question remained. What kind of people could commit such atrocities? Investigators began to dig. They identified 500 people who had worked in the Belsen complex. They filtered the list down. 45 guards and former employees were selected. Their destination was set. From September 17th to November 17th, 1945, they would face trial. The fire destroyed the camp. Now, the law would come for the command. September 17th, 1945. The date marked the beginning of a reckoning. The world turned its eyes to a courtroom in Lüneburg. People expected to see monsters with scarred faces. Instead, they saw young women. They wore neat blouses. They braided their hair. But the charges read against them described a descent into absolute darkness. Irma Grese, Elisabeth Volkenrath, Juana Bormann. The press labeled them the Beasts of Belsen. The Third Reich did not just recruit men. The death machinery required more than soldiers. It needed overseers for the female camps. Hundreds of women answered the call. They became vital gears in the Holocaust. These 3 women stood out, not for their rank, but for their sadism. Their actions led them to a cold December morning. The gallows waited. Irma Grese was the youngest. The archives describe her early life as a tragedy. She was born on October 7, 1923, a large family in rural Germany. But the house was not a home. It was a battleground. At 13, Irma's world collapsed. Visual suggestion. The police report describes the scene: a kitchen floor, a broken bottle, the acrid smell of chemicals. Her mother drank hydrochloric acid. She had discovered her husband's infidelity. Irma watched her die in agony. The trauma left a crack in her psyche. The rising Nazi regime filled it. At 15, she quit school. She worked briefly as a nurse's aide. It wasn't enough. She wanted status. She tried to join the League of German Girls. Her father forbade it. Cognitive loop. Why did she defy him? It wasn't just teenage rebellion. It was a search for a new family. She packed her bags and walked out. Grace wanted independence. The SS offered it. She was not coerced. Before turning 18, she requested a transfer to Ravensbrück. This was a concentration camp exclusively for women. She went as a volunteer. The narrative of forced conscription falls apart here. She chose the uniform. Ravensbrück was her training ground. She learned to stand still while others screamed. She adapted. 1942. Grace was 19 years old. She pinned the supervisor's badge to her tunic. Her superiors noticed two things: her efficiency and her fanaticism. She swallowed the propaganda whole. To her, the prisoners were not human. They were threats to her nation. Her father eventually found out. He expelled her from the family. He told her never to return. It didn't matter. Grace had found a new sense of belonging. She had power. Elisabeth Volkenrath came from a different background. There was no suicide, no dramatic break. She was born Elisabeth Mühlau, the daughter of a forest worker. She lived a simple life. She worked as a nanny. She cooked meals. She cut hair. Silent tension. At first glance, a typical working-class girl. But in reality, a dormant executioner waiting for a signal. That signal came in 1941. Volkenrath was 22. The war offered opportunities. She volunteered for the SS Auxiliary Corps. She also started at Ravensbrück. Her instructor was Dorothea Binz. Binz taught her the art of surveillance. Volkenrath proved to be a quick study. She didn't want to stay in the background. In March 1942, she requested a transfer. She wanted to go east, to Auschwitz. Juana Bormann was the anomaly. She was born on September 10, 1893. She was decades older than Grese or Volkenrath. Her history is confusing. She had been religious. She had performed missionary work. She had held a Bible in her hands, but faith did not pay well in the Depression. In 1938, she joined the SS for the paycheck. Bormann started in the kitchens at Lichtenberg. She cooked for the staff. Then she moved to the yard. She hadn't been indoctrinated in the Hitler Youth. She hadn't grown up chanting slogans. But the result was the same. The system transformed a former missionary into a nightmare. It proved a terrifying fact. Cruelty does not require ideology. Sometimes it only requires opportunity. Micro-curiosity. But this was only the beginning. Their paths were about to cross. The location was Auschwitz-Birkenau. The year was 1943. Grace arrived and climbed the ranks instantly. She walked the perimeter. She carried a heavy pistol. She used it. Volkenrath arrived soon after. She worked in the parcel office. She controlled the flow of food. She decided who received aid and who starved. Then the camp turned on her. She contracted typhus. It was the same disease killing the inmates in the barracks. She recovered. The illness did not soften her. It made her harder. Bormann arrived in May 1943. She took her post in the field. The three women were now together. Auschwitz amplified their worst instincts. They didn't just watch, they participated. A visual suggestion. The footage from the era is grainy. It shows the selection ramp. Officers point left or right. In the background, female guards stand with dogs. They herd women and children toward the concrete bunkers. The gas chambers waited. Events accelerated. 1945. The Red Army smashed through Poland. The SS burned the files and fled west. The guards were transferred to Bergen-Belsen. The camp was collapsing. Overpopulation was extreme. Food ran out. Typhus returned. In this chaos, the guards did not retreat. They continued their work. Under the command of Joseph Kramer, they maintained the terror until the very last hour. The British Army arrived in April. They found piles of bodies. They found the guards. The trial lasted 54 days. The defense argued coercion. They argued obedience. The judges looked at the evidence. The survivors pointed their fingers. The testimony was consistent. These women had enjoyed their work. Micro-reward. Finished, the court delivered its verdict. Death. On December 13, 1945, the executioner placed the hoods over their heads. The trapdoors opened. The story cut off here. 20 years old. That was the age of the most feared woman in Auschwitz. History often claims that female guards were merely spectators or reluctant participants, but the files tell a different story. These women did not just follow orders, they hunted for promotions. They designed personal methods of torture. They turned sadism into a daily profession. Why did ordinary citizens transform into executioners? It implies a slow corruption. But for Irma Grese, Elisabeth Volkenrath, and Juana Bormann, the transition was instant. They transcended the standard parameters of Nazi cruelty. The camp system was built on dehumanization. Yet, these three women found ways to make the horror personal. They did not just administer the camp, they innovated the suffering. Irma Grese. The prisoners called her the beautiful beast. Others whispered a different name, the hyena of Auschwitz. She was barely out of her teens, yet she developed a repertoire of violence that terrified veterans of the system. Her methods combined physical brutality with psychological warfare. The footage from the trials reveals a young woman with an impassive face, but the survivors remember something else. They remember her smile. Grese demonstrated evident pleasure in the pain of others. She did not miss the selections at Auschwitz-Birkenau. She stood at the railhead as the trains unloaded. With a flick of a finger, she sent thousands to the gas chambers. Witnesses noted a disturbing pattern. Grese deliberately targeted beautiful women for death. Jealousy drove her decisions. It wasn't just policy. It was a personal vendetta against anyone she deemed attractive. But her cruelty was not limited to the selection ramp. Grese turned animals into weapons. She trained a German shepherd specifically to attack human targets. The command was simple. The result was carnage. Survivors described the scene clearly. Grese would order the dog to tear apart a victim. She watched the animal mutilate weak women. She did not look away. She observed with satisfaction. When the dog was finished, Grese stepped in. She wore heavy boots with reinforced steel tips. She carried a whip braided from cellophane or leather. She used these tools to maximize physical damage. The violence had a sexual dimension. The tribunal files expose a dark intersection of power and lust. Grese maintained sexual relations with SS officers, but she also exercised absolute dominion over the inmates. Some prisoners were forced to satisfy her whims, others were used to entertain her lovers. It was a total abuse of power. Elisabeth Volkenrath was less famous than Grese, but she was equally lethal. Her position gave her total control. She was the head supervisor of the female camp. Her authority was absolute. At first glance, a bureaucrat, but in reality, a sadist. Vera Fischer survived the camp. Her testimony is brutal. She stated that Volkenrath beat her so severely that she required 3 weeks of hospitalization. The injuries were not accidental. They were the result of a calculated assault. Other witnesses saw Volkenrath hit prisoners 80 times in a row. She used a rubber truncheon. She did not stop until the victim was unconscious. The case of Elena Koperwas proves the cold calculation of Volkenrath's methods. The crime was minor. Elena possessed a ring and a medallion. Volkenrath caught her. The punishment was disproportionate. She forced Elena to run behind a bicycle all the way to the SS barracks. There, the beating began. Volkenrath used a rubber stick, but she didn't kill her immediately. She threw Elena into a basement. The diet was bread and water every 3 days. It was a slow execution. Later, she forced the weakened woman to clean the latrines. Elena contracted typhus. It was a death sentence by disease. Volkenrath also invented collective punishments. She called them sports. These were not exercises. They were methods of exhaustion. Malnourished, sick women were forced to perform strenuous physical drills. They ran until their hearts gave out. They did squats until their legs collapsed. Many died right on the parade ground. One incident stands out. Volkenrath found a sick prisoner taking vegetables. She did not shoot her. She forced the woman to kneel. She made her hold the stolen vegetables above her head. The clock ticked. 1 hour passed, then 2. The torture lasted 4 hours. When the woman's arms inevitably dropped, Volkenrath beat her into unconsciousness. The order was given, no help until nightfall. Juana Bormann presented a different kind of horror. They called her the woman with the dog. In her youth, she was deeply religious. She attended church. She spoke of morality. But inside the camps, she underwent a total moral metamorphosis. The values of her past evaporated. Bormann developed a fascination with suffering. Like Grese, she used her dog as an extension of her will. The German Shepherd was not a pet. It was an instrument of torture. During a forced march back to Auschwitz, a prisoner fell out of line. Bormann did not hesitate. She ordered the animal to attack. The dog tore the woman apart. The victim was dragged away on a cart. She did not survive. Another incident was recorded in the files. Bormann grabbed a prisoner by the hair. She threw the woman to the ground. She held her there and allowed the dog to bite her repeatedly. The blood flowed profusely. But Bormann wasn't done. She sent the mauled woman to Block 25. That was the waiting room for the gas chambers. Bormann also collaborated with the worst of the worst. She worked alongside Josef Mengele, the angel of death. She helped select prisoners for his medical experiments. She knew exactly what would happen to them. She sent them to the lab anyway. Early 1945. The war was turning. The Allies were closing in. The three women were transferred to Bergen-Belsen. The conditions there were catastrophic. The camp was designed for 10,000 people. By 1945, 60,000 prisoners were crammed into the barracks. Tuberculosis was rampant. Typhus spread through lice. Dysentery killed hundreds every day. There were no gas chambers in Belsen, but death was everywhere. It operated through hunger and plague. The environment provided new opportunities for cruelty. The three guards did not slow down. They adapted. Events accelerated. The British Army was approaching. Most guards fled. They burned their uniforms and ran into the woods. But Grese, Volkenrath, and Bormann stayed. Witnesses saw Grese shooting prisoners randomly from the windows. Volkenrath continued her regime of lethal beatings in the mud. Bormann walked her dog through the dying crowds, using the animal to terrorize women who could barely stand. They remained until the liberation. They knew capture was imminent, yet they continued the abuse. This persistence suggests a profound identification with their roles. It wasn't fear of their superiors anymore. The Third Reich was collapsing. They tortured because they wanted to. The psychological terror was as effective as the physical blows. They cultivated an atmosphere of total unpredictability. Survivors remember the sound. Irma Grese used to whistle. She whistled soft, cheerful tunes as she walked through the camp. To the prisoners, that sound was worse than a siren. It meant she was hunting. It meant arbitrary violence was coming. Volkenrath used silence. She developed an impassive, stone-like expression while administering lethal blows. She showed no anger. She showed no effort. The contrast was psychologically devastating. Bormann used the invisible threat. Even when her dog was not present, the fear of the animal controlled the block. Prisoners froze at the mention of her name. The behavior of these three women broke the mold. They were not just cogs in a machine. They were architects of individualized suffering. The camp environment allowed their sadistic impulses to surface, but they chose to act on them. They turned from common citizens into monsters. Each developed a personal signature of cruelty. And that signature distinguished them, even in a place where atrocity was the only law. April 11th, 1945. On this date, a negotiation took place that defied all military logic. Heinrich Himmler knew the war was lost. He did not order a final suicide charge. He authorized a surrender. The transition at Bergen-Belsen was not a battle. It was a handover. A neutral zone was established. The guns fell silent. But the SS guards did not leave. Joseph Kramer, the camp commandant, stood at the gate. He didn't run. He didn't burn his uniform. He waited for the British and Canadian forces to arrive. When Lieutenant Colonel Mervyn Taylor Gahn stepped out of his jeep, Kramer saluted. He presented himself calmly. He told the officers he had stayed to maintain order. It was a grotesque statement. Inside the wire, order meant death. Why did they stay? The borders were porous. Escape was possible. But their arrogance blinded them. They believed their status as state officials would protect them. They thought the Allies would view them as colleagues in a difficult situation. They were wrong. Among them stood the women, Irma Grese, Elisabeth Volkenrath, Juana Bormann. They remained at their posts, confident and cold. At first glance, they looked like diligent auxiliary staff. But in reality, They were executioners in skirts. April 15th. The British forces fully breached the camp perimeter. The reality hit them like a physical blow. The smell of decaying flesh was overwhelming. It clung to the uniforms of the liberators. The scene challenged human comprehension. 13,000 unburied bodies lay rotting in the sun. Some were piled like firewood next to the barracks. Others were scattered in the mud. 60,000 prisoners remained alive, but barely. They were skeletons with skin. Typhus, tuberculosis, and dysentery raged without control. The medical facilities had collapsed weeks ago. The daily death toll was 500 people. In this apocalyptic landscape, the guards stood out. They were well fed. Their uniforms were clean. The identification process began immediately. Survivors, barely able to lift their heads, found the strength to point fingers. They signaled the three women. The fear was gone. Only the desire for justice remained. That one, they said. Irma Grese was the easiest to spot. She was young, she was beautiful, and she was sadistic. One survivor told the soldiers, "It is impossible to forget that smiling face while she selected who would live and who would die." Elisabeth Volkenrath tried to adapt. She stripped off her SS tunic and put on civilian clothes. She tried to mix with the chaotic crowd. It didn't work. Survivors from Auschwitz recognized her instantly. They remembered the beatings she ordered in the women's camp. There was no hiding place. Juana Bormann looked less imposing. She was older, but she was known for her dog. The prisoners remembered the animal tearing into human flesh on her command. She was pointed out. British soldiers handcuffed them. 45 staff members were lined up. The British command decided on an immediate visceral punishment. They did not just throw them in a cell, they forced them to work. The order was given, clear the dead. The camera records, SS officers stripped of their weapons, dragging limp bodies by the ankles. There were no trucks available. The guards had to use their hands. They were forced to load thousands of corpses onto trucks and drag them to mass graves dug by British bulldozers. This was a confrontation with the result of their negligence. The reactions varied. Irma Grese remained defiant. Photos capture her face, tense, angry, but not sorry. A British officer noted her attitude. She handled the dead bodies with absolute contempt. To her, they were just objects, waste to be removed. Elisabeth Volkenrath cracked. The smell and the physical contact broke her composure. She vomited repeatedly while carrying the remains. Juana Bormann shut down. She became a machine. She dragged the bodies with a blank, impenetrable expression. She did not look at the faces of the dead. The media was there. Military cameramen filmed every second. The footage shows a young woman in SS boots throwing a skeletal corpse into a pit. These images shocked the world. The public was used to stories of male brutality, but here were women. They looked like nurses, they looked like neighbors, yet they stood amidst a landscape of hell, complicit in mass murder. Richard Dimbleby of the BBC watched the scene. The dissonance was impossible to reconcile. Ordinary women, indescribable crimes. The interrogations followed swiftly. The strategy of the accused was simple: deny everything. Irma Grese sat in the chair and lied. She claimed she was a low-level administrator. She said she never selected anyone for the gas chambers. Volkenrath played the fool. She insisted she didn't know the fate of the prisoners she selected. She claimed ignorance of the gas chambers. Bormann defended her dog. She told the interrogators the animal was a harmless pet. She denied ever training it to attack. But the evidence was overwhelming. The British prosecutors had piles of sworn statements. Survivors detailed dates, times, and specific acts of cruelty. The files grew thicker every day. But this was only the beginning. The physical camp had to be destroyed. The risk of typhus was too high. The British Army brought in the heavy armor. Flamethrower tanks rolled through the gates. Jets of fire consumed the wooden barracks. The structures burned to the ground. The physical evidence of the filth was erased, but the legal evidence was secure. The capture of Grese, Volkenrath, and Bormann marked a turning point. International justice was evolving. For the first time, gender would not be a shield. They were transferred to a military prison. They waited for the next step. The town of Lüneburg was preparing. The beast of Belsen Trial was coming. Thus ended the era of impunity. 44 defendants. That was the head count in the dock. For the first time in history, a court prepared to systematically judge women for crimes against humanity. Major General HPM Bernie Ficklin presided over the British military court. The authority came directly from the royal decree for the trial of war criminals. The prosecution divided the case into two massive pillars of evidence: atrocities at Bergen-Belsen and the horrors of Auschwitz-Birkenau. This dual jurisdiction was a trap for the accused. It meant they could be prosecuted for acts committed on Polish territory, leaving them no legal loophole. 54 days. That is how long the hearings lasted. Day after day, the court consumed mountains of documents and hours of testimony. But the most damaging weapon was the camera. The British Army screened footage filmed during the liberation of Belsen. The projector hummed. On the screen, mountains of corpses appeared. The survivors looked like walking skeletons dragging themselves through the mud. The footage cuts. The lights come up. In the courtroom, the contrast was sickening. The three accused women sat in the dock, freshly bathed and presentably dressed. They looked like ordinary citizens. But the screen behind them told a different story. Irma Grese took center stage. Her defense attorney, Major L.S. Duval U. Crumfield, chose a risky strategy: partial denial. Grese admitted to striking prisoners. She admitted to violence. But she drew a hard line at the gas chambers. She denied any role in the selections. Her defense tried to paint a portrait of innocence. They claimed she was a naive young woman, a victim manipulated by a brutal system. Why did this defense fail? It wasn't just the logic. It was the witnesses. The naive girl narrative crumbled the moment the survivors spoke. Ilona Stein took the stand. She didn't hesitate. She testified, "I saw personally Grese shoot a prisoner who was standing near the fence." The courtroom went silent. Then came Helen Copper. She described a scene of pure sadism. Grese didn't just watch. She ordered her dog to attack prisoners who were too weak to work. Throughout this, the camera records, Grese's face shows no shame. She oscillated between arrogance and boredom. When the prosecutor asked about the selections at Auschwitz, she gave calculated, evasive answers. But Colonel Tien Backhouse was ready. He confronted her with a specific incident. He described how she beat a prisoner until the victim lost consciousness. Grese's reply was short, cold. Discipline should be maintained. Elisabeth Volkenrath was next. Captain A.H. Champion handled her defense, mirroring Grese's tactics, but with a twist. Volkenrath admitted she was present at the selections in Auschwitz. There was no point in denying it, but she claimed ignorance. She told the court she didn't know the purpose of the selections. She claimed she never knew about the gas chambers. A murmur of incredulity swept through the survivors in the room. They couldn't believe the audacity. But the testimony of Dora Safran ended any doubt. Safran described a scene of brutal violence. An old woman could not stand up during roll call. Volkenrath didn't help her. She beat her to death. Safran's voice remained steady as she described the details. Volkenrath dragged the body down the stairs. She kicked the woman repeatedly as she lay still on the concrete. Volkenrath denied it, but her voice was mechanical. Her eyes were empty. Against the detailed memories of multiple witnesses, her denial sounded like a rehearsed script. Then came Juana Bormann. At first glance, a frail, middle-aged woman, but in reality, a lethal operator. Her lawyer, Major A. Monroe, played the age card. He portrayed her as impotent, a small cog in a big machine, trapped by impossible circumstances. He argued she simply followed orders. But the witnesses destroyed this image. They described her ordering her dog to tear prisoners apart. Bormann admitted owning a dog in Auschwitz, but she insisted she never used it for violence. Her reasoning was bizarre. She told the court that using a dog against a prisoner was against regulations. She claimed she would have been punished for it. The assertion was absurd. In a place where mass murder was state policy, she cited the rulebook. Alexandra Sividowa took the stand to bury this lie. She described a march where a prisoner lagged behind due to a swollen leg. Bormann didn't check the regulations. She ordered her dog to attack. The injuries were fatal. The prosecution faced a logistical nightmare. Crucial witnesses were scattered across a broken Europe. Some were in hospitals, recovering from starvation. Others had already died from the lingering effects of the camps. But the British prosecution did not stop. They tracked them down. They gathered 54 witnesses who provided consistent, locking details. The press went into a frenzy. The Daily Express coined a headline that stuck, "The Beautiful Beast." The media couldn't look away from Irma Grese. She was only 22 years old. The public struggled to reconcile her youth and physical attractiveness with the monster revealed in court. It challenged every Victorian notion of female nature. Men killed in war. That was expected. But women committing systematic torture? That was a shock to the system. November 16, 1945. The deliberation ended. The court returned. The room was packed. Irma Grese, guilty on all counts. Belsen and Auschwitz. Elisabeth Volkenrath, guilty, identical verdict. Juana Bormann, guilty of crimes in Auschwitz. It was enough. The next day, November 17th, the final act began. Joseph Kramer, the Beast of Belsen, and 10 subordinates stood to receive their sentences. The 3 women stood among them. The judge spoke one word that mattered: death. The method was specified: hanging. This was a crucial distinction. Firing squads were for military faults. Hanging was for criminals. The British wanted the world to know these were not soldiers, they were murderers. The reactions were caught by the observers. Irma Grese remained defiant. She threw a challenging look at the judges. No tears, no remorse. Elisabeth Volkenrath stood frozen. She looked stunned, as if she truly believed she would walk free. Juana Bormann disconnected. Witnesses described her entering a trance state, her eyes glazing over, checking out of reality entirely. Grese tried one last move. She appealed the sentence, demanding a new trial. The review was brief. The rejection was swift. The legal precedent was set in stone. Crimes against humanity had no gender. The perpetrators would be judged by their actions, not their sex. The Belsen trials proved that participating in a genocidal system carried individual responsibility. For Grese, Volkenrath, and Bormann, the legal road ended here. There was no escape. Their next appointment was not with a judge, but with the executioner in Hamelin prison. December 13, 1945. 11 ropes hung in the dark. On this day, the old Hamelin prison in Lower Saxony ceased to be a mere jail. It became the stage for a calculated mechanical purge. The British authorities had cleared a special block, a row of small, cold cells. At the end of the corridor, a single room waited: the execution chamber. This was not a job for soldiers, it was a job for a professional. The British Crown summoned Albert Pierrepoint. He was the most efficient executioner in the empire. He did not ask questions. He traveled to Germany with a singular purpose: to execute the sentences handed down at the Belsen trials. Why did the British fly in a specialist? They could have used a firing squad. But the goal was not messy vengeance, it was clean justice. The method was the long drop, a technique of mathematical precision. It was designed to fracture the cervical vertebrae instantly. No suffocation, no struggle, just the snap of the neck. To achieve this, Pierrepoint needed data. The rope length had to be exact. Too short, the prisoner strangles. Too long, the head is torn off. The day before the hangings, Pierrepoint and his assistant, Regimental Sergeant Major O'Neill, walked the row of cells. They needed to weigh and measure the beasts. The first door opened. Sergeant O'Neill barked the order, "Bring Irma Grese!" She stepped out. She was laughing. The footage in our minds shows a disturbing image. She looked like a healthy, vibrant girl, the kind you would see in a bakery or park. She faced the men without fear. Pierrepoint asked for her age. She paused. She smiled at the executioner. It was a strange, intimate moment. Pierrepoint later wrote that they shared a smile, as if she were merely embarrassed to admit her years. 21, she finally said. It was a lie of omission. She was 22. But the number didn't matter. The scale did. At first glance, a shy young woman. But in reality, a monster responsible for thousands of deaths. Pierrepoint recorded the facts in his ledger. Height, 1.65 meters. Weight, 68 kilos. He did the math on the spot. To kill her instantly, the rope needed to be exactly 2.24 meters long. He closed the book. The next cell opened. Elisabeth Volkenrath. Here, the mood shifted. There was no laughter, no charm. She stared at the floor. Her answers were single syllables: 1.62 meters, 65 kilos. Pierre Point noted the numbers. The calculation was made. Then came Juana Bormann. The contrast was sharp. Bormann was not young. She was 52. Pierre Point noted she looked worn out. She practically crawled into the corridor. She stepped onto the scale and began to tremble. Her composure broke. "I have my feelings," she whispered in German. Pierre Point wrote it down. It was a rare crack in the armor. A woman who had fed prisoners to dogs was now shaking at the sight of a measuring tape. But the executioner did not offer comfort. He only checked the dial. The morning of the 13th began before dawn. The logistics were tight. 11 executions, one day. The strategy was specific. Women first, individually. Then the men, in pairs. The British wanted it done fast. 9:34 in the morning. The process began. Pierre Point and O'Neill climbed the stairs. The German officer threw open the door to the corridor. A row of pale faces watched them pass. Inside the execution chamber, the air was still. Brigadier Patton Walsh stood with his watch raised. He nodded. Pierre Point walked into the hall. "Irma Grese," he called out. The guards slammed the other cell doors shut. Only one opened. Grese stepped out. The corridor was narrow, too small for a formal march. Pierre Point had to pin her arms right there in the hallway. "Follow me," he said in English. O'Neill repeated it in German. The camera records. A young woman walking steadily. She enters the room. She sees the noose. She steps onto the chalk mark on the trapdoor. She stands firm. Pierre Point reached for the white hood. As he pulled it over her head, cutting off the light, a voice came from beneath the cloth, soft, languid. "Schnell, quick." Whether it was defiance or resignation, no one knows. It was her final command. Pierre Point pulled the lever. The trapdoor banged against the stops. The rope went taut. The doctor stepped forward, checked the pit, and nodded. Life extinct. 10:04. Elisabeth Volkenrath entered the chamber. Pierre Point moved with the same mechanical speed. He strapped her arms. He guided her to the mark. Unlike Grese, Volkenrath said nothing. No final defiance, no plea. The lever moved. Gravity did the rest. She was 26, a former hairdresser who had become a camp supervisor. In less than 10 years, she had gone from cutting hair to selecting victims for the gas chambers. Now, her neck was broken. 10:38. Juana Bormann was next. She could barely walk. The guards had to help her up the steps to the scaffold. She was limp, exhausted by fear. Pierre Point adjusted the noose. The drop was calculated for her frailty. The trap opened. The third woman was gone. The bodies were removed immediately. The ropes were reset. Then came the men. 12:19. Joseph Kramer, the beast of Belsen, stood on the trap door. Beside him stood Fritz Klein, the camp doctor. They died together. The lever fell. The ropes snapped tight. For the rest of the afternoon, the pairs continued. By evening, 11 bodies lay in simple coffins. There would be no funerals. The British authorities were smart. They knew the danger of martyrs. They did not want a gravesite for future Nazis to visit with flowers. The bodies were taken to the incinerators. The fire consumed them. The ashes were collected and scattered in a secret location, likely within the prison walls. They simply ceased to exist. Pierre Point packed his kit. His work set a standard. It wasn't about rage, it was about the law. He treated the butcher of Belsen with the same technical detachment as a common criminal. This was the message. The Reich is gone. Only the law remains. But the inventory of the dead revealed one final insult. When the British catalogued Irma Grese's belongings, they found cash. 440 Reichsmarks in her pocket, a bank book with 4,400 more. A textile worker in Germany earned 76 marks a month. Grese had a fortune. It was blood money, loot stolen from the dead. Her execution broke records. At 22, she was the youngest woman executed under British law in the 20th century. But the age didn't save her. The message from Hamelin was clear. It didn't matter if you were a man or a woman. It didn't matter if you were 20 or 50. If you participated in the machine of death, you would pay with your life. For the survivors of Auschwitz and Belsen, the news of the hangings brought a grim satisfaction. The beautiful beast was dead. The wolf was dead. The era of the camps ended not with a bang, but with the squeak of a lever and the thud of a rope. December 13, 1945. 11 executions in a single day. Inside the stone walls of Hamelin prison, the British hangman Albert Pierrepoint worked with cold efficiency. He tightened the noose 8 times for the men and 3 times for the women. The list of the condemned was led by Joseph Kramer. The press called him the Beast of Belsen. Why did a man from a decent family become a monster? It wasn't an accident, it was a career path. Born in Munich to a middle-class Catholic family, Kramer was the prototype of the bureaucratic executioner. He joined the Nazi Party in 1931, the SS in 1932. From that moment on, his rise was marked by blood. He started as a simple guard in Dachau. He moved to Sachsenhausen, then Mauthausen. In Auschwitz, he served as an assistant to the commandant Rudolf Höss. But his true nature revealed itself at Natzweiler Struthof on French soil. There, he didn't just supervise, he acted. Kramer personally poured the gas salts. 80 Jews were murdered to provide skeletons for the Reich University in Strasbourg. The court listened in silence as Kramer described the process. He admitted to hearing the victims breathe for 30 seconds inside the chamber. Then, the breathing stopped. Visual suggestion. The footage shows Kramer in the dock, his face blank, showing no emotion as the verdict is read. In May 1944, he returned to Auschwitz-Birkenau. He managed the logistics of mass murder. Thousands died under his watch. When he transferred to Bergen-Belsen in December, the camp was collapsing. From 7,000 prisoners to 60,000. Disease rampaged. Hunger killed 300 people every day. Kramer stood before the judges and shrugged. He claimed to be an administrator overwhelmed by impossible circumstances. At first glance, a victim of chaos, but in reality, a sadistic killer. The evidence destroyed his defense. Witnesses testified about 2 Russian prisoners. They were starving. They picked up rotten potatoes from the ground. Kramer didn't shout. He pulled his gun and shot them dead. The trapdoor opened at 12:19 p.m. Executed alongside Kramer was Fritz Klein, 57 years old, a doctor. Klein represented the absolute corruption of medicine. Born in Romania, a veteran of World War I, he joined the Waffen-SS as an ethnic German. By 1943, he stood on the selection ramp at Birkenau. His job was binary, left or right, life or death. He decided who would work and who would go to the gas chambers. Klein did not deny it. He offered a chilling justification. He said, "The Jews are the gangrenous appendix of humanity. My Hippocratic oath tells me to cut it out." To him, murder was simply medical hygiene. But this was only the beginning. Franz Hüssler followed them to the gallows. A former cook at Dachau, he became a master of deception. In Auschwitz, he oversaw the euthanasia center. In Birkenau, he perfected the art of the lie. Visual suggestion. The camera records, women and children standing on the platform, confused and terrified. Hüssler spoke to them calmly. "This is not a vacation center," he told the victims. "We will take care of your health. We will offer you well-paid work." He knew they would be gassed minutes later. His words were designed to prevent panic, ensuring the machinery of death ran smoothly. The brutality extended to the kitchens. Karl Franzio and Ansgar Pitchen were cooks at Bergen-Belsen. Their job was to prepare food for the SS. But they armed themselves. When starving prisoners tried to scavenge vegetable scraps or leftovers, the cooks opened fire. They shot people for stealing garbage. Even as the British forces approached for liberation, they continued to kill. Wilhelm Dürr was the youngest, 24 years old, a product of the Hitler Youth. He led a death march in April 1945, 50 kilometers, from Kleinbodungen to Belsen. Visual suggestion. In the frame, muddy roads littered with the bodies of those who fell behind. Witnesses saw Dürr shooting prisoners who couldn't keep walking. If a prisoner had bad feet, he shot them. If they sat down, he shot them. 30 people died on that road. His commander, Franz Stoffel, claimed the prisoners received adequate rations. The survivors described systematic starvation and bullets to the back of the head. These 11 executions were symbolic. They covered every level of the system: administration, medicine, logistics, kitchen staff. But justice was not evenly distributed. The Hamelin hangings were only a fraction of the verdicts. 19 other defendants received prison terms. Herta Eilert got 15 years. Hilde Elisabeth got 10. Gerda Botha, known for beating women with wooden planks, received 10 years. Survivors like Eva Olsen were outraged. Olsen saw Botha beat a woman nearly to death. Why does she deserve to live when so many innocents died? Olsen asked. There was no answer. Geopolitics intervened. The Cold War began. The West needed a stable West Germany. Sentences were reviewed. Many war criminals, including Botha, were released as early as 1951. For the victims, it was a betrayal. Hundreds of guards never faced a judge. They fled during the chaos of the final weeks. They burned their uniforms and disappeared into the population. The judicial process was fragmented and incomplete. However, December 13, 1945 remained a pivotal moment. For the first time, individuals were hanged not just for war crimes, but for participating in a system of genocide. The 11 bodies at Hamelin paid the maximum price, but their deaths could not balance the scale of millions murdered. The trapdoors closed. The era of the camps ended. The long shadow of history remained.